Patrick Kane is finally back where he belongs, and the news of his signing has sent Chicago into a state of euphoria.
It still almost felt like too good to be true. The longer it went, the more nervous I got that it was maybe like Kane was waiting on Buffalo to make a move or whatever.
Almost at a loss for words. Like it's that magnitude of a signing. Like over the moon. Again, all-time favorite player. Like I can't stop smiling. I can't stop pacing through the house. Like, man, it's the best day ever.
He's the greatest American-born hockey player ever to play, and he is sitting at the top of the greatest Blackhawk ever to wear that great sweater. He's still got a lot of gas left in the tank. This was a heck of a move by General Manager Kyle Davidson.
But while Blackhawks fans got so excited that they practically started role-playing,
it's showtime.
Thank you, Ryan. Others were far more skeptical. After all, Patrick Kane turns 38 in November. He's coming off a career low in time on ice per game and just landed a bigger contract than anybody expected him to. So which side is correct? Will Kane rejuvenate the Blackhawks and form an electrifying offensive tandem with Connor Bedard? Or is this all just nostalgia slop to distract the fan base from a disappointing offseason? In this video, we'll dive into the tape, the analytics, and the storylines behind Patrick Kane's recent career to find out. And fair warning, you may be shocked at how different the reality is from what the skeptics are saying. But first, if you're one of the 99.1% not yet subscribed, it's the best way to support this channel. We do film reviews, tactical analysis, and cover everything hockey. So subscribe and hit that bell. Getting selected first overall in the NHL draft usually comes with enormous pressure. Before you've even taken your first official shift, thousands of fans are already wearing your jersey, expecting you to become the face of the franchise instantly to justify years of anticipation. You can imagine how that pressure would only intensify when it's an Original Six franchise drafting a prospect so electrifying that one scout described him as having the best hands in all of hockey, not just junior. Yet when Patrick Kane was selected first overall in 2007, nobody in Chicago seemed to care at all. Here is Kane himself reminiscing on that experience.
I remember coming to Chicago, being drafted first overall, and we had preseason games. There's like 3,000 people in the building. And me and some of my teammates went into the crowd and just sat in the crowd and watched the game and didn't get bothered by one person.
Yeah.
Now, it's a common joke that American hockey players are D-list celebrities, but not getting recognized in your own home stands when you're the recently drafted face of the franchise is a different level of embarrassing. And it perfectly proves just how disconnected the Blackhawks had become from their own fans. Only 3 years before drafting Patrick Kane, ESPN rated the Blackhawks the worst franchise in all of sports, and for good reason. Under the ownership of Dollar Bill Wirtz, the team refused to air its own regular season home games on local TV. This stubborn media blackout, combined with Wirtz's refusal to pay market value to superstars like Jeremy Roenick, Tony Amonte, and Eddie Belfour, had sunk the team into complete irrelevance. The only way to watch the team play was to pay for pricey home tickets or to hope that they made the playoffs so their games would be nationally televised. But the playoffs were also a pipe dream because before Kane was drafted in 2007, the franchise was stuck in a 46-year Stanley Cup drought and had missed the playoffs in 9 of the previous 10 seasons. Most fans in Chicago just stopped caring about hockey, and many of the fans that stuck around started supporting the AHL Chicago Wolves instead, who poached legendary Blackhawks announcer Pat Foley and even mocked the team with marketing slogans like "We play hockey the old-fashioned way. We actually win." This is the context behind Patrick Kane's rise in Chicago that national media fails to fully grasp. The job of getting fans back into the United Center seat seemed almost impossible and would require a transcendent talent and personality. Luckily for the Blackhawks, Kane was that and so much more. By the time his entry-level deal even expired, Patrick Kane already achieved more than many NHL superstars do in their careers. In the 07-08 season, he led all rookies with 72 points in 82 games, winning the Calder Trophy in the process. In his sophomore year, he earned his first career All-Star Game selection while leading Chicago back to the postseason for the first time since 2002. There, he scored his first career hat trick and led the franchise to its first Western Conference Finals berth since 1995. In the final year of his ELC, he secured an Olympic silver medal with Team USA, posted a team-leading 88 points in the regular season, and became the youngest player in league history to score an overtime Stanley Cup winning goal. And the thing is, Chicago is a town that idolizes winners. He was elevated to that rare class of legends that never has to buy another meal or another ice cream ever again in the city. And yet he was just getting started. 3 years later, Kane led Chicago on an unprecedented 24-game point streak to open the year and finish the season with a Conn Smythe and yet another Stanley Cup. 2 years after that, he scored the Game 6 dagger to win his third Stanley Cup. And as the rest of the Blackhawks core aged out and became less effective, Kane started carrying the team more and more. 1 year after his final Stanley Cup win, he pulled off a historic 26-game point streak en route to a 106-point campaign that made him the first American-born player in NHL history to win the Hart Trophy. And throughout his career, he played by his own set of rules. In a league filled with superstars with no personalities, Kane seemed almost bigger than life. From his annoying mouthguard chew to the outlandish mullet to the often imitated iconic celebrations. In many ways, Kane was more than just an athlete. He was to my generation of Chicago fans what Michael Jordan was to the generation above me. He made watching hockey feel like a guilty pleasure. It's not fair to just call him the most influential Blackhawks player of the modern era because he's the main reason that anybody in Chicago is even a Blackhawks fan to begin with. He's more than just the greatest American-born player in history. He was so relentlessly clutch and iconic that he shifted the way the hockey world viewed American talent altogether. For example, here is Leafs fan and legendary YouTuber Johnny Superbman making a flippant comment about American players.
So, Goofball McGundy, Tim Gleason, typical American, no situational awareness whatsoever playing hockey, unless you're Patrick Kane, who I know, like Brett Hull, is Canadian somewhere down the line.
Of course, he's just being comedic, but that was the sentiment around American hockey before Patrick Kane changed it. Even though he technically wasn't a member of the USA gold medal team in 2026, the entire generation of players grew up idolizing him. So even if this was just a goodbye tour, Kane has still earned that contract 10 times over. But thankfully, this is more than just nostalgia slop, because even at 37 years old, Kane's offensive toolkit still firmly projects him as a high-end top 6 play driver. 6 years ago, a series of NHL superstars were asked what skill they'd steal from a different player. Outside of McDavid's speed and Ovechkin's shot, this was the most popular answer.
Yeah, I would say Patrick Kane's hands. They're pretty okay.
I'd probably take McDavid's speed or Patrick Kane's hands.
Probably steal Kane's hands.
Sure enough, Kane's hands are arguably the best in history and have built a bit of a cult following among NHL players and fans alike. They're the foundation of his incredible ability to manipulate defensive structures, to operate as a smaller player near the net, and to control the pace of play. But in his prime, Kane's hands were only a piece of the puzzle. Bruce Boudreau once compared him to a water bug because of his elite skating ability, which makes sense because even though he was never a burner, Kane had excellent lateral mobility and change of direction due to his powerful skating stride. But the absurd comparison to a water bug works for more than just his skating. You see, despite their unassuming appearances, water bugs have incredibly painful bites, so experts warn that you should never go chasing against them. In a similar way, Patrick Kane was only 5'9" and 160 pounds at his combine, so opponents were always tempted to just use physicality to get rid of him once and for all. Unfortunately for them, that was much easier said than done. Nobody learned that lesson the hard way more than the 2015 Anaheim Ducks. After an insane 71-hit effort in Game 2 against Chicago, Ryan Kesler doubled down on the Ducks' game plan, promising that no human can withstand that many hits. But Kane and the rest of the Blackhawks had other ideas. On this play, Clayton Stoner attempts to clear the puck, but Duncan Keith holds it in. You can see the aggressiveness of the Ducks here because as soon as Keith gets rid of the puck, the aforementioned opposition Ryan Kessler goes out of his way to nail him with a hit. But when a team is this aggressive, they often over-pursue, and a player like Patrick Kane can easily make them pay. He stick handles Matt Bolesky out of his skates, outweights Sami Vatanen, and fires the puck home through Anderson. And over the final 2 games of the series, the Blackhawks used this identity to completely turn the tables. Suddenly, the Ducks were the team panicking and making mistakes. The Blackhawks were the team first to every 50-50 puck, and Toews and Kane were the ones dictating everything. I strongly believe that the sheer helplessness that Patrick Kane instilled in his opponents is far more significant than his statistics and accolades show. Everything in his skill set made him even more terrifying, from his incredible hands to his strong skating to his elite vision to his boisterous personality. The moment opponents made a mistake, Kane wouldn't just make them pay, he'd embarrass them as much as possible in the process and make sure to rub it in afterwards. It seemed that this trend would never end, but in 2019, one injury almost ruined everything. For very toolsy players, a severe injury can derail an entire career. But from a young age, Patrick Kane, with some encouragement from his father, made sure that injuries would never be an excuse for regression.
I broke my wrist when I was like 10 years old. They put a cast on me, and my dad's like, we're still gonna play with the cast. So I couldn't shoot forehand with the cast on. So I really had to learn how to use my backhand. So funny story, actually, we go back to the doctor, I get my cast off, and the doctor says, okay, we gotta let the wrist heal now with the cast off, and you're gonna have to take about 2 or 3 weeks off. My dad said, give me the cast back. So put the cast on, and I would tape it up before every game for the next couple of weeks and just continue working on my backhand. So
Sure enough, Kane's backhand remains among the best in the NHL to this day, and this relentless drive to improve himself under any circumstances has carried over to his professional career in spades. In his introductory press conference, Kane went out of his way to announce that he was looking forward to learning from the young players on the Hawks. This statement is more than just lip service. Even in his prime, every single offseason, Kane found a new area for improvement. He worked alongside skills coach Darryl Belfry to systematically break down his game and repeated skills until the execution felt automatic. But nothing put this work ethic and drive more to the test than the right hip osteoarthritis and impingement that began late in the 2019 season and became progressively worse in subsequent years. Over the next 3 seasons, his skating had deteriorated to the point that his leftover right crossover was basically non-existent. And this hip injury affected much more than just change of direction. For example, Kane's wrist shot has always been an underrated part of his game. During his MVP season, he had a league-leading shooting win above replacement rating of 4.8, which beat the second-place Vladimir Tarasenko by more than a full win. But while most modern-day wrist shot specialists use very flexible sticks to basically slingshot the puck on net, Kane used a stick with a flex between 102 and 107 during his entire prime, which is unusually stiff for a skilled player of his size. To compensate for this, a lot of the power in his wrister came from his lower body. On this play, Kane first turns his hips towards the puck to collect the pass in stride. Then, as he takes his first touch, he quickly snaps his hips back towards the left, using that rotation alongside his crossovers to accelerate through the turn without sacrificing his forward momentum. He then kicks out his right leg as a counterbalance while using that same rotational force to generate the power he needs to fire the puck home. Dynamic lower body movements like this became much more difficult as Kane's hip deteriorated. By the end of his Blackhawks tenure, his stride had become upright and ineffective, his shooting velocity had plummeted, and he even stopped celebrating his goals by dropping to a knee. Finally, in 2022, his entire career faced a crossroads. The Blackhawks had traded away most of his supporting cast during the offseason and made their intentions to rebuild extremely public. That left Patrick Kane with 2 options. He could either shut himself down for the season and address his hip once and for all, or he could somehow adapt to the worsening injury long enough to earn an opportunity with a contender. Kane chose the latter option and proceeded to do what most considered to be impossible. He pulled off a ridiculous 7 goals and 10 points in his final 4 games with Chicago, and nearly capped the run with a storybook overtime winner in his final home appearance against Vegas. Unfortunately, replay showed that time had expired just before the puck crossed the line, but it nonetheless proved in no uncertain terms that his clutch factor was here to stay. And this spectacular run of form was not an accident either, because Kane's obsession with making minor adjustments over time eventually combined to counteract almost every disadvantage that the injury created. For example, in 2018, Patrick Kane adjusted his stick flex from 102 to 95. Now, this may seem like a minor adjustment, but it's still insane that a player that won the Hart Trophy only 2 years prior remained willing to experiment with something so fundamental to his game. Interestingly, he made this change after a 3-year period during which Kane never finished above a 40% in his shootout conversion rate. After making the switch to a lighter and whippier stick, he started shooting much more on his shootout attempts. And since then, he's had 16 shootout goals on 37 attempts for a 43.2% conversion rate. Even if it wasn't intentional, in recent years, this change also helped him adjust better to his hip injury by allowing him to generate more power in his shot without relying as heavily on his lower body. And instead of trying to blend every dynamic element of his offensive toolkit into each possession, Kane became increasingly clinical in the specific areas where he remained the most dangerous, which is creating and finishing high danger opportunities across the slot. Even when Chicago could no longer generate shots or chances, they were still the best in the entire league at generating dangerous cross-slot passes thanks almost entirely to Patrick Kane on half a hip. Now, to be clear, it was still very obvious that Kane lost more than just a step, and his analytics during this period illustrate just how compromised he had become. As a comparison point, these were Kane's on-ice metrics at 5-on-5 during his MVP season. Now, granted, these numbers don't fully do him justice since he's always been a massive analytical outlier, but let's just use them as a baseline to show just how much he regressed because of his hip. In his final season in Chicago, the Blackhawks controlled only 40.2% of the shot attempts, 40.4% of the shots, 38.4% of the expected goals, 37.9% of the scoring chances, and only 42% of the goal share. Ultimately, his short stint in New York was not the success he had hoped, and he did take the surgery option the following offseason. But the adjustments that he had made to allow him to reach this point to begin with proceeded to help him establish a new and very promising baseline. One of the most frustrating storylines around the Blackhawks signing Patrick Kane is the constant reminder that he isn't the player that he once was. Obviously, it's unfair to expect a 37-year-old to still be in MVP conversations, and he certainly is no longer that player. But the version of Kane that the team just signed is better in almost every single way than the last version of Kane that wore the Blackhawks sweater. Firstly, his ability to constantly adjust his craft to his circumstances is something that the young core of the Hawks desperately needs to learn. One of my favorite examples of this is that in the summer of 2014, he specifically talked about developing more of a shot-first mentality as a way to better set up his playmaking. Within 2 years, he put up his career high in goals with 46 and won the Hart Trophy in the process. But he didn't remain stubborn on this change, because towards the end of last year, he made the exact opposite adjustment as he worked his way through a lingering wrist injury that affected his ability to finish. His total shots on goal fell from 227 during his final season in Chicago to 169 last year. But while his overall volume plummeted, his high danger shots actually increased from 37 to 44. In addition, because of his constantly changing role on the Red Wings, we got to watch a version of Patrick Kane that we never had the chance to see in his prime. 10 years ago, Kane was almost always the first forward vacating the defensive zone, and it was the job of everyone that he played with to find him activating so he could create offense single-handedly. As his speed eroded over time, his role in transition became much more varied. On this play, Kane is at the end of a long defensive zone shift, as his line had been hemmed in for over a minute. A long shot by Montreal deflects wide and winds up near the half boards, and Kane gathers the puck. But instead of just clearing the zone and going for a line change like most players would, he looks up and fires an incredible lofted saucer pass over a diving driving Selke Trophy winning Nick Suzuki straight to the paw of the cat for a breakaway. This is arguably the best pass of the entire season, but it's the type of play we never really got the chance to see earlier in Kane's career. And even though his lower body strength is not what it once was, he's continued to generate opportunities in similar ways as he did earlier in his career through pure anticipation and technical ability. For example, this type of play was one of Kane's signatures in the first half of his career. He gathers the puck, drives behind the net, strides powerfully through a desperate check from an opponent until the goalie shifts to the opposite post, and then finds a wide open teammate with a blind backhand pass for a tap-in. Now, this doesn't usually show up on Kane's tape anymore. At his current age, he more easily feels hounded by high motor players, which sometimes causes him to take stupid penalties that evaporate his team's fleeting playoff hopes. But anyway, it's not in his best interest anymore to attract pressure from opponents intentionally. That doesn't mean that he lost his ability to play from behind the net. On this play, Kane sends the puck back to the point, but Hamannik's shot sails well wide. Johansson's pass down low deflects past Kasper over to Kane, and look at how quickly he's able to get the puck off the boards and into the slot to Comfer for a wide open chance. This is just one of a mountain of plays where Kane minimizes his puck touches so opponents can't keep up, while maximizing the impact of each one. And oh, by the way, he also got a lot of his explosiveness back. Last year, Kane set his personal highest max skating speed since 2021, reaching 22.8 miles per hour. That is in the 78th percentile among all NHL forwards, and almost half a mile per hour faster than Connor Bedard's fastest speed burst last year. Kane also brought back a lot of his own unique skating elements, from his spinorama to his tendency to wheel around the offensive zone instead of waiting in one spot. And sure enough, with these changes, his analytics came right back up to his baseline. Last season, he nearly matched his prime possession numbers while surpassing his MVP season results in shot, expected goal, and high danger chance share. Again, on-ice metrics were never the best way to judge Patrick Kane, but it's still fascinating to see that even at 37 years old, he keeps getting better. His offensive win above replacement percentile has improved in each of the last 3 seasons, and his power play win above replacement percentile last year was even better than it was in his prime. The Blackhawks were dead last on the power play from December 1st through the end of the season, so this rejuvenated version of Patrick Kane will work wonders. And then there is Kane's clutch factor. I intentionally did not analyze this much because, to be honest, I have no idea what makes Kane this clutch. I'm sure his work ethic, processing, and adaptability probably contribute, but none of them adequately explain how he effortlessly throws away every weakness in his profile as soon as a clutch situation shows. This clutch factor is still very much present, as Kane continues to show up when the storylines are the biggest. In his 5 games against the Blackhawks as a member of the Red Wings, Kane recorded 2 goals and 7 points with a +7 rating, including the emphatic overtime winner on Chelios night. And when Detroit's season began collapsing down the stretch last year, Kane responded with 7 goals and 24 points over his final 20 games. This is not the 2026 equivalent of the Blackhawks trading for Nick Foligno and then playing him on the first line, because unlike Nick Foligno, Patrick Kane is always lightning in a bottle. At 37 years old, that bottle is probably better suited for a sheltered role and is sometimes sealed shut for 12 games at a time, but he's also fully capable of going off for 5 points and taking over a game single-handedly every time he steps onto the ice. And the Blackhawks have not had a player like that other than Connor Bedard. At 37 years old, Kane's timeline is very different than the rest of the Blackhawks. He's currently signed to a 2-year deal and wants to play beyond it, but even if his trainer believes that he can play till he's 50, he's much closer to the end of his career than the beginning. For a young Blackhawks team, that means 2 things. Firstly, there will be more pressure on the current core to help support him. On this play, Seider sends the puck up the right boards to Kane, who carefully carries it forward, waiting for DeBrincat to join him on the rush. But DeBrincat goes one one step further and barrels into Kane's man to create some added space. That gives Kane the opportunity to walk into the right circle and shoot the puck, and DeBrincat finishes the rebound. In this way, even though he is still a play driver, Kane needs complementary players to find and create space much more than he did earlier in his career. Thankfully, the Blackhawks are full of profiles with excellent off-the-puck movement like Bowen Byram and Roman Kanserov, excellent work rates like Oliver Moore and Frank Nazar, and excellent one-timers like Anton Frandell and Nick Lardis. Whoever ends up playing with Kane will have more pressure and a greater opportunity for growth while working alongside one of this generation's best hockey minds. Secondly, going off that point, Patrick Kane brings more pressure to the locker room, and honestly, it's about time. Last season, Connor Bedard stated, "We don't want to win in 3 years, we want to win now." Jeff Blashill asserted with some flowery language that finishing in the bottom 2 of the league was not something they were going to do next year. If this team is this confident in their goal of winning, why shy away from the added pressure of the man who symbolized winning in Blackhawks colors like no other? And it should be noted that many Blackhawks fans feel more loyalty to Patrick Kane than they do to the organization. If there's ever a moment where, for example, Kane asks Bowen Byram where the F he's going on a power play, nobody will be taking Byram's side in that argument. That added pressure should force Chicago's young core to raise their standards and start winning again. And sure, the timeline of the signing is a bit odd given Kyle Davidson's suggestion that the Kane era in Chicago was gone for good, and the price tag is indeed pricey. But even if this was a slightly desperate signing, it's also one with only positive possible outcomes. If he carries the Blackhawks near the playoffs, they'll have achieved their goal. If he regresses and falls down in the lineup, he will get the send-off he deserves, because no fans in the world will cheer Patrick Kane louder than Chicago fans will. And no matter what happens, the young core of the Blackhawks will forever get to brag that they got to play with the greatest American-born player in the history of the National Hockey League. But did you know that the first overall pick in the 2026 NHL Draft grew up a massive Blackhawks fan because of Patrick Kane? Click here to learn more.